In 1932, Australia went to war. But this wasn't a war fought on foreign soil, nor was it a battle between nations. No tanks were rolling across borders, no fleets at sea, no enemies in uniform. This was a war waged in the heart of Western Australia, where dust choked the air, crops withered in the sun, and desperation hung heavy over the wheat fields. But the true adversary wasn't drought, or famine, or even economic collapse. It was a bird. Not just any bird, but the emu. Towering, fast, and flightless, these overgrown descendants of dinosaurs marched in their thousands across the outback. They devoured crops, demolished fences, and trampled the hopes of struggling farmers. And so, in a decision that would go down in history as both surreal and strangely symbolic, the Australian government sent soldiers with machine guns. What followed was a campaign so absurd, so futile, and so steeped in irony that it would be remembered not as a victory, but as a warning. A warning about underestimating nature and overestimating bureaucracy. This is the story of the Great Emu War, when man, with all his weapons and wisdom, was humbled by a bird. After the thunder of World War I fell silent, the Australian government faced a new challenge, rebuilding the lives of its returning soldiers. In an ambitious effort to reward their service, over 5,000 veterans were granted plots of land in the vast, rugged interior of Western Australia through a soldier settlement scheme. The promise was simple: till the soil, plant your future, and find peace through agriculture. But peace proved elusive. These were not seasoned farmers. They were former soldiers, artillerymen, riflemen, medics trained in the art of war, not in coaxing life from the earth. The land they received was dry, isolated, and often poorly suited for farming. The soil was hard and unyielding, rainfall unpredictable, and infrastructure nearly non-existent. Then came 1929. The world collapsed into the Great Depression, and with it, so did the price of wheat, the very lifeline for these soldier settlers. Government subsidies promised to stabilize the market never came. The farmers were left to fend for themselves, struggling to make ends meet as dust storms rolled over barren fields and crops withered before they could be harvested. And yet, the most unexpected enemy hadn't even arrived. By 1932, conditions were dire. But it wasn't just the economy. It wasn't just the weather. No, what truly threatened these desperate farmers was what marched across their struggling land on two legs, feathered and unrelenting. Not in hundreds, not in thousands, but in hordes. The enemy was the emu. In the spring of 1932, just as hope was beginning to shrivel alongside the crops, another wave of hardship swept across the wheat fields of Western Australia. Nearly 20,000 emus, tall, flightless, and relentless, began migrating from the arid coastlines into the interior. Drawn by recent rainfall and instinctive patterns passed down through generations, the emus surged inland in massive flocks, their long legs kicking up dust as they moved like a living tide. Their destination? The newly cultivated farmland of Campion, where weary soldiers turned farmers were already teetering on the edge of ruin. And with their arrival, chaos followed. Fences meant to keep livestock in, and pests out were flattened beneath the emus' powerful strides. The holes they left behind created open doors for another plague, rabbits, which poured into the fields and devoured what little vegetation remained. It was a dual invasion, fur and feathers, crippling what few crops had managed to survive drought and economic despair. The emus weren't just a nuisance. They were a force of nature. 6 feet tall, with sharp beaks and strong, clawed feet, they ran at speeds up to 50 kilometers per hour. They traveled in coordinated groups, almost like infantry formations, scattering the moment anyone approached only to regroup moments later. Herding them was like chasing the wind. Trapping them was nearly impossible. Shooting them, that would soon prove to be just as futile. For the farmers, this wasn't just another bad season. It was the breaking point. Their livelihoods were being ripped apart literally by birds. Desperate, they turned to the only force they believed could help: the government. They wanted firepower. They wanted military intervention. And astonishingly, the government said yes. A decision that would go down in history for its sheer absurdity. The Australian government did the unthinkable. Minister of Defence Sir George Pearce, faced with mounting pressure from desperate farmers and a parliament eager to appear decisive, authorized a full-blown military intervention not against a foreign enemy, but against a native species of bird. The operation was to be quick, efficient, and overwhelmingly forceful. After all, how hard could it be to shoot birds? Leading the campaign was Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery, a seasoned officer, trained in the brutal theatres of the First World War. Now, he was being asked to turn that experience toward an enemy no military textbook had prepared him for: Emus. He arrived in Campion in early November 1932, accompanied by 2 soldiers, 2 Lewis machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of .303 caliber ammunition, enough to mow down entire enemy regiments. Except this time, the enemy wasn't marching in formation or taking cover in trenches. It was sprinting across open fields on powerful legs, scattering like marbles the moment danger approached. Fast, unpredictable, unrelenting. The Australian military had brought war machines to a wildlife problem, and as the sun rose over the dusty plains of Western Australia, the so-called Great Emu War officially began. The soldiers didn't expect resistance. After all, these were birds, flightless ones at that. On November 2nd, 1932, the unit spotted their first target, a group of about 50 emus grazing near Campion. It was the perfect opportunity. The soldiers crept into position, leveled the Lewis machine gun, and waited for the ideal moment. Then, they opened fire, and the gun jammed. In a flash, the emus bolted, their long legs carrying them out of range before the soldiers could clear the weapon. A few were hit. Most vanished into the bush, unharmed. The ambush had failed, and so had the technology. This moment would set the tone for the entire campaign. Over the next several days, the soldiers attempted new strategies: ambushes, patrols, mobile attacks. But nothing seemed to work. The emus were faster than expected, way faster. In one particularly infamous attempt, the soldiers mounted a machine gun on the back of a truck and gave chase. The results were humiliating. The emus outpaced the vehicle. The truck bounced wildly over uneven terrain, making it impossible to aim. Dust clogged the gun, and the jostling made it nearly impossible to fire accurately. Meanwhile, the emus zigzagged like veterans of guerrilla warfare, scattering and regrouping with uncanny coordination. The military had trained for trench warfare. They weren't ready for emu warfare. And the birds, They just kept coming. What began as a straightforward mission quickly spiraled into one of the strangest tactical failures in Australian military history. The Emus, it turned out, were not just fast, they were clever. At the first rumble of an engine or glint of sunlight on metal, the birds would scatter with military precision. It wasn't random panic, it was almost coordinated. Farmers swore some birds acted as scouts, standing tall in the distance and watching for signs of movement. The moment danger approached, the signal was clear. The flock would split, vanish, regroup always out of range. Gone were the days of massed emu sightings. Now, the birds broke into small, mobile flocks, constantly on the move, avoiding open fields and ambush zones. They had adapted to warfare faster than the soldiers themselves. Attempts to corral them only wasted time, energy, and ammunition. Machine guns jammed again and again, the rough terrain shaking the delicate weapons with every bump and jolt. For every burst of gunfire, there was another malfunction, another escape. Entire volleys would be fired into empty air as the birds darted and weaved like veterans of a war they never asked for. By November 8th, the results were in. Over 2,500 rounds of ammunition had been spent. The confirmed emu casualties, around 200. That's over 12 bullets per bird, and even that estimate was considered optimistic. The Emus, it seemed, had won the first round. The soldiers, exhausted, frustrated, demoralized. They had come to dominate nature and found themselves humiliated by it. While the soldiers in Western Australia struggled to hit fast-moving birds, another battle was brewing, this one in the headlines. The Australian press had a field day. Across the country, newspapers lit up with ridicule Emus outmaneuver military. Birds proved too smart for government. Machine guns no match for feathered foes. Cartoonists had a new favorite target: soldiers, flailing in dusty fields, while smug Emus strutted away untouched. One editorial quipped that the birds should be awarded medals for their tactical genius. Others wondered aloud if the government might send in the Navy next, perhaps submarines for the ducks. The operation was supposed to be quiet, efficient, forgotten. Instead, it became a national joke. Taxpayers were outraged. Why, they asked, were public funds being used to shoot birds with military-grade weapons? Why were veterans of the Great War being ordered to chase after livestock like underpaid pest control? In Parliament, Sir George Pearce, Minister of Defence, stood tall and tried to save face. He claimed the operation was a service to farmers, that the military was simply responding to calls for help, that this was about protecting Australia's food supply, not about failing to kill birds. But behind closed doors, Pearce was watching the headlines and counting the cost. The truth was inescapable. The Emus were still out there. The soldiers were losing, and the entire country was laughing. The Great Emu War was becoming a national embarrassment. Through it all, Major GPW Meredith remained calm, disciplined, professional. A soldier to the core, he carried out orders, tracked results, and coordinated what few tactics could be applied to a war against birds. But even Meredith, who had survived the trenches of World War I, was astounded by what he was witnessing. In a post-campaign report, he wrote words that would live in infamy. If we had a military division with the bullet carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. It was equal parts respect, disbelief, and exhaustion. The Emus weren't just surviving, they were thriving. By mid-December 1932, the numbers spoke for themselves. Over 9,000 rounds of ammunition had been fired, and the confirmed number of Emus killed, fewer than 1,000. That's over 10 bullets per bird, and thousands more birds still roamed free across the farmland of Western Australia, continuing to eat crops, trample fences, and make fools of trained soldiers. The campaign had failed, not just logistically, not just strategically, but spectacularly. Quietly, without ceremony or press releases, the military pulled out. The guns were packed up. The soldiers went home, and the Emus remained. The Great Emu War was over, or at least Phase 1 was. The Great Emu War was officially over, but the problem remained. Emus continued to ravage farmland. In 1934, 1943, and again in 1948, similar efforts were made, none with significant success. Eventually, the government introduced bounty systems, which proved far more effective. Thousands of emus were killed by professional shooters and farmers, rather than soldiers. Ironically, emus are now a protected species. Australia has come to respect their role in the ecosystem, but the memory of the war lives on half joke, half warning. The Emu War is still taught in schools, referenced in memes, and even dramatized in indie video games. It is a symbol of how overconfidence, poor planning, and underestimating nature can lead to international embarrassment. To this day, people ask, how could a country lose a war to birds? The truth? They didn't just lose. They were outsmarted by a bird with a brain smaller than a walnut, but legs like pistons and a will of iron. The Great Emu War is a reminder that not every solution needs a machine gun, and sometimes nature writes the best comedy. This was the Great Emu War, one of the oddest chapters in modern history. One bird at a time, it pecked its way into legend. Never forget, 1932, the birds won.